All right. So when this is released in Canvas for you, you'll be able to see it. I don't think it's released yet for you to see. It will be released by Tuesday morning anyway, okay? I can make a copy of the rubric criteria. I'll do that. I think I have it already, and I'll send it to you in Slack so you can look at it while you're brainstorming. So this is what it's going to look like when you look at this assessment in Canvas. So it gives you a background. It gives you a description. So you're going to create, in groups of 2, create a Ruby terminal app. It can be something to entertain, surprise, solve a problem, inform, or compute, etc. Okay? 5 key phases: brainstorming. We're going to do that today. Evaluate a range of ideas and choose the best one. There's some pretty trivial ideas listed there, but you guys should brainstorm today, stuff that sounds fun to you to do. Then you'll plan. You can do some of this today as well, okay? Even if you don't know exactly what you're going to work on, you can plan things like, how are you going to work together? How do you want to manage your Trello board? Make your Trello board today if you have time, okay? Make a Trello board. Decide who's going to manage the Git repo. I'll talk more about the Git repo in a minute, but talk about how are you going to work together. Do you want to pair program the whole thing? You can pair program when you're here in person on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then if you want to work remotely, you can pair program through LiveShare and VS Code. I'll work out, I've tried using it before and then I confused myself. If anybody in here knows how to use LiveShare, I might get you to show that. Otherwise, we'll work it out together this afternoon, because you can program with LiveShare as well. Yes, Aiden, you have a question?
You're saying that we should be planning on all this stuff in the Trello board, but when will we find out what that is?
Today, after lunch. Okay? Yes. So the plan for today is I'm going to go through this rubric now. That may take us up to lunchtime because there's a lot to talk about, and I imagine you have a lot of questions. Okay? Then after lunch, I'll tell you who you're paired with. You will get together in your pairs. You can spread out a bit to do that. So there's the rec room upstairs on the 4th floor. Some of you can go up there if you want. You can kind of separate out in here. If you want to go to the cafe next door, I don't mind, okay? So you'll, after lunch today, when you know who you're paired with, you'll brainstorm first, come up with at least one solid idea that you both agree is a good one to do. Then you should plan how you're going to work together, okay? How you're going to work together in class, if you're going to work together outside of class, kind of set some rules for yourself working together, and understand that. You could also have a look at the rubric and start to flesh out the README. So I'll give you, I think it was asked if we could release this today so you guys could use it, but if not, I'll give you the pieces of information you need. So you can actually do a lot of this planning bit today without even planning specific for the thing you're going to work on. Okay, there's a lot to do that's not even related to actually the thing you're going to code. All right, so you can take time to do that today. On Tuesday morning, like I mentioned, you'll get your idea approved by me. You shouldn't start working on it until you do that, because I might, talk with you, and we might find out that actually isn't going to work very well. So if you spend time coding on that, like, nothing's lost. I'm sure you'll learn something from it, but the time might be better spent doing something else, like planning your workflow, setting up your repository, setting up your Trello board, setting up your testing spreadsheet, setting up all these things, make sure that both of you have access to it, and decide on how you're going to work together on this project. So starting on Tuesday, you'll start developing your application. You'll do that together. My suggestion is to do it with pair programming, but I'm not going to mandate that you do it with pair programming. Okay, you're going to decide probably today, this afternoon, how you're going to actually work together. You'll test your app, and testing is part of the rubric criteria. We'll get to that. So like we went through yesterday, you'll do something similar to that. You'll have a testing spreadsheet, you'll have tests documented, and you'll have test results documented for when you ran those tests. And then on Monday week, you will present together your project to the class. Okay? Nothing to be scared of. We're all friends here. It's a good, safe space in this course to learn how to present what you've done in front of people. Because when you work on a team, even if it's a small team, you know, you're going to have like scrum meetings or other kind of things. You're going to have maybe retrospectives, demos at the end of sprints where you'll have to demonstrate what you've done, and you want to have some level of confidence doing that. You can create the greatest things in the world, and if you can't tell people about them and show them, it doesn't make as much difference, does it? So this is a nice, safe space to do that, so don't be afraid. So there's a few example app ideas. You probably have some of your own already. So the way that we mark this is that you have 2 days to work on it. Like I mentioned this morning, we're going to mark it like you've worked on it for 2 days. I think we did agree this morning that we're going to give you until Friday 9 p.m. to submit it. So you'll start working on it Tuesday. Thursday's a public holiday, it's Anzac Day. We'll give you to Friday at 9 p.m. to get it submitted. But we only expect you to work on it for 2 days, and that's how we mark it. Yes, Aiden? It needs to be pushed to GitHub, and it needs to be submitted to Canvas. Both.
Is that within the first 2 days?
That needs to be done by Friday at 9 p.m.
Right, so
but you need to push. Tuesday? Yeah. Post Wednesday. Yeah, Tuesday and Wednesday you work on it. You can work on it Thursday and Friday up till 9 p.m. It needs to be submitted. Now we're going to get, and it's in the criteria. But what I'm going to expect of you on the Git side, I don't expect you to use a collaborative Git workflow because I haven't taught you how to do that yet. I've only taught you how to do a solo Git workflow, right? When you're just dealing with your own repository or your own fork, and you're add committing and pushing stuff to your own fork, pulling from a remote repo. We haven't done any Git collaboration in this class yet, so I don't expect you to use that. What I do expect is that you have a Git repo and that you are committing to it often within those 2 days at least, or however long. If you work on it for 4 days, during those 4 days, I expect you to commit often. I expect those commit messages to tell a story. I expect them to be descriptive and say what you're committing with that commit. I will, there will be less points given if you do these giant commits that just say change stuff, or like update, and it's got, 100, all, yeah. So don't do that, okay? And so the reason is because it is a really bad work practice. You are going to struggle as a developer if that's the way you do, if that's the workflow you use. It's going to bite you in the ass before you know it. Remember that Git is so cool because we can roll back, but we can only roll back to a commit. And if you get into a situation, and you will one day, I promise, more than once, where you have some nice working code and then you screw it up with a change that you make. And then you want to go back to when things were nice and pretty and everyone was happy and there were rainbows and unicorns. And you have to first figure out what was that point, and if you have really nicely written commit messages, that's easier to do. And you have to have a commit to go back to. And if you've done these massive chunks of codes and single commits, then you're either going to have to pick through those and figure out what to undo, or you're going to have to undo a bunch of stuff and redo a bunch of stuff. So that is not the right way to do things. When you work with other people on a team, if you don't have nice commits with nice commit messages, it makes it really hard for other people to review your code. And when code doesn't get reviewed properly, bugs get released, okay? It's just the way it is. So I was talking to one of my, someone who used to work for me on my team when I was an engineering manager at SAP, and now he's working at StackTrace. And he said on his team there, if they don't have nice commit messages that tell a story, that's what he said, they have to tell a story, then the pull request gets rejected. And they have to go do their work again. And they have to roll back those commits and put them in a way that tells a story. So nobody does that, right? Everybody's figured it out. So they always do nice commit messages that tell a story. So I expect you to practice good solo workflow process. I don't expect you to have 2 repos or even a repo and a fork of it. You can use one repo so the code changes can happen on one person's laptop, all right? That's okay. You can work together sitting next to each other doing the work on one laptop. You can work separately and send files however you want to. You can use a collaborative Git repository if you're comfortable with that, and that's the easiest way for you to work. It's up to you. But what I expect from you is that the repo that you submit as part of this assessment is show some good discipline, okay? Show some nice workflow, lots of commits with nice messages, all right? You have to submit via Canvas. Part of that submission is that you tell us the repo that you use, so you're also pushing your code to a repo, but you have to submit a file in Canvas. So this is the submission, okay? And everybody has to submit. You're working on a team, you're both going to submit exactly the same content. The file name will just be different, okay? So what you submit in Canvas is a zip file, and the name is this format, your full name, underscore, a1-1.zip, okay? So if you're Luke Skywalker, the file name looks like this. All right? So you'll have the same content, just different file name. Don't submit different content from each other. That's really confusing to me. Then I don't know what to look at. All right? Submit the same content. The file name's just different. Is that clear? This is what goes in that zip file. This is also important that you follow this structure. I can't tell you how many times I have to take up points because people don't follow the structure for the zip file. If you don't know how to create this structure in a zip file, talk to me and I'll help you do it, okay? At the root folder of your zip file, okay, should have a README in it, a readme.md, just like the one that you'll have in your GitHub repository, the same one, the one and the same. In that README, at the very top, you should have a link to your GitHub repository. In fact, what you should do is copy this bit of text, paste it into a file, and use that as the skeleton for your README, okay? And then fill it in. This is something you can do tomorrow. You can start to fill in some of these things, not anything that's app specific, but you can decide on your GitHub repository, for example, create that repository, put the link in here. If your repository is private, make sure that you put me as a collaborator so I can look at it, okay? Or you can make your repo public. Either way, I don't care. Just make sure that I have access to your repo. So a link to your repo, description of the app. So you can't do this until you know what you're doing, but you can just put the skeleton in for this. So the purpose of the app, what it does. So why are you making it? That's the purpose. Why are you making this app? What does this app do is the functionality. Instructions for use. How does somebody use this app? You should have at least one gem. So the first instruction should be bundle install. Yes? Bundle install to install the required gems. And you'll have a gem file, won't you, with your project? Yes? And then tell me which file you want me to run. Bundle install, then run Ruby file name. Okay? Tell me how to run your app. Any screenshots that you want to include in your app, okay? You don't have to have any screenshots. I don't think there's a rubric criteria related to it, but you could put some screenshots if you want to. Details of design and planning process. So evidence of the app idea brainstorming session. This could be as simple as these are the ideas we considered. If there were things that you discussed about those, like we decided not to do this because, we decided to do this because, it doesn't have to be a novel. Some description of the discussion that happened during your brainstorming and how you came up with the idea you came up with, okay? That's something that you could do tomorrow, all right? Or today. That's something you could do today. The project plan and timeline. So this is something else that can happen today. So you sit together, you decide how long you're going to work on this. You're going to just work on it next Tuesday and Wednesday, or you're going to work on it up until Friday. You put together a timeline, and this has to be done by Friday. You start from the back. We have to have a zip file. Each of us has to have a zip file. Everything's pushed to the repo. We submit by 9 p.m. on Friday. And then you can back up from there. So we want to have, the code complete by this time, so we have time for testing. Remember, you also have to put together a PowerPoint presentation. We'll get there. So you have to factor in time to work on the PowerPoint presentation, okay? So put together a rough project plan and timeline. It's not going to be a big exercise because you only have a couple of days to work on it. So there's not much there, but put together something. And then screenshots of your Trello boards. So as you're going to create your Trello board today, hopefully, all right? And then you'll start adding stuff to your Trello board perhaps this afternoon. You could come up with some things like definitions. You know, you could come up with maybe some things like, well, maybe it's just in definitions is what you come up with today, and your list, your workflow list. You decide how you're going to do that. Maybe your, you know, your size definitions for cards, your GitHub, your repo definition card, your requirements definition card. You won't be able to do that. You won't be able to fill it out until you get your idea approved. But as you work on your project together, I don't expect you to do this to any great extent because it's only a short project and there are only 2 of you working on it, but move some cards around, okay? And as you move cards around, you create cards and move them around, just take some screenshots of that Trello board and stick them into your README, all right? Any pictures that you reference in your README or like your testing spreadsheet, any files that you reference in your README need to be in this docs subdirectory, okay? That's where images go, where spreadsheets go, any other documents that you use, those go in that docs subdirectory, okay? The source code for your app. So the way this works is you're going to push all your source to GitHub, yes? Everything you push to GitHub, everything that's in your GitHub repo directory goes in this source subdirectory of your zip file. Does that make sense? So this zip file does not match what you have in GitHub, okay? What you have in GitHub goes in this subdirectory, in this source subdirectory, okay? So whoever's got the repo on their machine, you're just going to copy that directory's contents into the source subfolder in your project directory. Does that make sense? If that's unclear for anybody, let me know, and I'll make sure that you do that part right, okay? So what goes in the source subdirectory is exactly what's in GitHub. Now the README goes in your root directory. If you also have a README in your source directory, that's okay. Because I recognize that the README goes at the base of your GitHub. Your PowerPoint presentation goes in the PPT subdirectory, but it's not a PPT file. Export it as a PDF file. If you don't know how to do that, ask somebody. All right? If you export it as a PDF, it'll look the way you expect it to look. Okay, you can look at the PDF and make sure that it looks right. If you give me a PPT file, I have Ubuntu on my machine, and I use LibreOffice. In fact, I use Google PowerPoint for everything. I use Google Docs and online stuff for all of my stuff like that. I don't use like Microsoft Office. All right, so put a PDF in that PowerPoint directory. All right, any questions about what goes into the zip file? I think you get, let's see how many points you get for this, but you get full points for this just by following the structure, okay? Just by following the structure, you get full points for that criteria. And if you don't follow this structure, then you don't get full points for this criteria. That's a silly way to throw away points. All right. Your presentation. So a 5-minute presentation, it's not very long, right? 5 minutes. So part of the art of this and the learning is to learn how to present what's important in 5 minutes and not 10 minutes or 15 minutes. In 5 minutes, okay? It should include a walkthrough of your app and its features, a review of your build process, including challenges, favorite parts, if there are any ethical issues. There may be, depending on what you're going to build. And then answering questions. The answering questions bit can fall outside of the 5 minutes, okay? But you be prepared to answer questions if people have them, all right? So in 5 minutes, though, you should be able to walk through your app and then talk about the process of working on the app. All right, so this is the guts of things. This is what you get marked on. This table of criteria is what your marks are based on. 100%. This is what your marks are based on. Okay? So it's important that you understand the criteria and that this drives your choices while you work on your app and what you do. So, the first criteria is that you made an app that works. So, a passing criteria is that it works, and there might be some error cases, maybe some corner cases you didn't cover, maybe some places where it doesn't work the way you expect it to, but mostly it works. It doesn't just like exception when you try to run the file, right? If it just exceptions when I try to run the file, then that's not passing. Okay? A credit, it executes with minimal errors, so maybe one error, 1 or 2 max. The difference between passing and credit is that in a credit case, you've got some comments in there that let me know what's going on. You have good user prompts. That's what differentiates a credit from a pass. There might still be some errors, but I can see that you understand what you've written for the most part, and that a user can use your application and knows how to use your application because the prompts are good. Okay. A distinction. It executes without any errors, has good user prompts. You have comments for each function. Now let's talk about comments for a minute, because there are going to be several criteria that talk about code comments. This is how I feel about code comments and how I'm going to mark. If you write really nice code with really good variable names, method names, good control flow, good breakdown into classes and methods, you don't need a lot of comments. The code tells a story. The code is self-explanatory. If you write self-explanatory code, then I don't expect you to have heaps of comments. It is a better practice to write nicely formatted, readable code than to just chuck a million comments in and use variable names like var or a or foo. Okay? So I'd much rather you write readable code. Really nice code. You can just look at the code. You don't need any comments at all. You can just read it and it makes sense, like you're reading a book, like you're reading English. It explains what it does, just in the way that it's written. So if you write super readable code, you don't have to have as many comments. Okay, and the way that you can test for this is the two of you look at it and then ask a third person to look at it and say, do you know, within 5-10 minutes of looking at this, do you know what this does? And if they don't, then you either need to make it more readable, or if you're kind of challenged there, then just put some comments in. Okay? At this point, a lot of you aren't quite at the skill level to write super readable code. You can pick good variable names and you can pick good method names, but maybe your mastery of control flow and structure and data structure isn't quite there. That's totally okay. All right? So if you need to use comments, use comments. The idea is that when I look at your code, or anybody looks at your code, they don't have to spend 2 hours reading one file to figure out what the hell's going on. Okay? It's obvious either by the comments or the way the code's written what this code does. Okay? All right, so an HD for this criteria is executes without errors and excellent user prompts. So what's excellent user prompts? It's always clear to the user what they have to type in, and when they've typed in something that your program doesn't understand. When they type in something your program doesn't understand, your program tells the user, oh, I'm not sure what you mean. Choose one of these things. So in the example of the cafe, for example, for that example, if I'm using your cafe app and I type in L for latte, and then it just asks me for another thing and it doesn't actually record that I ordered a latte, then that's kind of confusing to me as a user. I thought I ordered a latte. You didn't tell me I didn't order a latte, Or if I type in latte with 1 T, I thought I typed in latte. But you didn't register that I typed in latte and you didn't tell me that. Okay? So that's an example of excellent user prompts. The user's always clear about what they've done and what they need to do to use your application through the way that you're communicating with the user. So they know how to exit the program, so you tell them how to do that. They know how to take advantage of the features of your app just based on the prompts. They don't have to have a guide that tells them how to use your app. It's just by just using your app, they know what to do. Okay, that's good, excellent user prompts. And you have a specific purpose either through the way your code's written or through comments for all of your methods, control structures, input requirements, and output results. Okay? Again, that doesn't have to be code comments if you have nicely written code, and I can tell by what you have written there. And somebody else can tell you can ask someone else. Okay, next criteria. Shows an ability to solve a real-world problem by abstraction into appropriate coding paradigm. So this is about the problem-solving bit of it, breaking it down into pieces. So these criteria are a bit vague, so I'm going to tell you what I'm expecting here. So a failing is that I look at your code and it's all over the place. Like the methods don't make sense, or the way that it hops around, the class definitions don't make sense if you use classes. None of it makes really a lot of sense. It looks like you just kind of like wrote some stuff and hoped that it worked, and sometimes it does. Okay? Now, it's got to be pretty bad for me to consider it a failing. If the whole thing is that way, then that's a failing case. All right? If pieces of it demonstrate that, then that'll be a passing case. So passing as code is adequate and crudely solves the problem. And that can also be things like maybe you should have used more methods, but you still solve the problem. It's just a bit not as modular as it could be. Or maybe there are places you could have used classes where you didn't, and so you have these kind of crude data structures that are a bit difficult to use and make the code a bit clumsy. Yes, Aiden.
So when you say inelegantly solves the problem, would that be like when you're doing this during your own and you made it work, but you haven't made it try yet?
So inelegantly. So yeah, inelegantly is that I can. So code is solidly thought through. I can tell that you've got some really nicely defined methods, maybe, but maybe you could have used classes and you didn't. The solution isn't exactly elegant. The solution's still a bit clumsy, but it's clear from looking at the code that you understood everything you wrote there, and you thought through your choices of data structures, and you thought through your choices of where you needed methods and those kinds of things. A distinction is that the code is well thought through, so that's obvious when you look at the code, and it cleanly solves the problem. So you've got nice separation into methods and classes. It's nice and clean. There's not a lot of repetition. That's a distinction. And an HD is, it's really like I couldn't do any better than what you did there. Somebody with, and this is going to be, not everybody's going to be able to do this with the level of understanding you have, and that's okay, all right? But some of you may be able to do that, and some of you may aspire. It's something to aspire to anyway, okay? So an HD is difficult to get for this particular criteria. But it's possible. Okay, the next one, this is related to that you've documented your design in your README, okay? So in your README where it says app user workflow diagram, okay? So your user stories, how your user's going to use this application, something written about that, okay? So it could just be user stories. What you actually end up with should satisfy what you initially came up with. And if it doesn't, then there should be documentation in your README in that section that says, originally we planned to do this, but we realized that it would take too long, and so we changed it to this. Want to see that what you come up when you're designing your app and you're thinking through the user stories is actually what you build. And when it's not what you build, that you've circled back to consider those user stories and what had to change and why. Okay? So this criteria is really about documenting your design process and when your design process has to change. So if there's nothing in your README about that design process, if there are no user stories, there's nothing about what you plan to do, there's no evidence of it in your Trello board, then that's a failing, okay? It's passing if you say something about user stories and for the most part what you built, satisfies those requirements. It's a credit if your README plus some code comments or the way that your code is written shows evidence of how those user stories are being met. Okay, a distinction if you've got at least one test case, that's a spec, at least one test case that maps to a user story. Plus you've got, documentation in your README and your code either is commented or is written in a way that I can see you're addressing those user stories and what you designed. And an HD is those things that you have more than one test that maps to a user story or something in your design. So an HD is very doable on this. It's mostly about documenting your user stories and then following through that your code satisfies those requirements and that you test to make sure your code satisfies those requirements. Okay? Overall structure of the code. So this one is really closely related to this one, appropriate coding paradigms, abstraction into appropriate coding paradigms. That one and this one are pretty much the same criteria, okay? So you probably get the same score on those two criteria. This has a little bit, I'll tell you the difference. This one, see how it mentions README? And the other one is about code. So this one, it's the same sort of thing, but it's that your README and describing the user stories and the function of your app also demonstrates that you've thought through how you need to structure things. Okay? So this is more focused on the README that you've got that documented there. This one is about code comments. You can see it in the criteria. So just like I said before, either comments or code that doesn't require as many comments. One or the other is okay for me. All right? And this is just about comments that have explanations of the higher order functionality of the app. So, it's clear that, okay, here we're, getting user input, and here we're looping until the user tells us we're done, and inside of the loop we're, adding to the order, and so not every little detail, but that your methods, what they do is clear, your big control structures like loops and what they do is clear, and that's clear either in the comments or in the way the code is written. This one is also really closely, this one actually is I probably marked the same as this one. So abstraction and breaking it down into modules, functions, and classes. I'm probably going to mark those two the same because this one's also about code. This one is about being dry, so it's very, very specific about the dryness of the code. So if there's some repetition, it's a pass. If that repetition is really minimal, like you only do it once, maybe, but the key pieces of knowledge are separated out, then that's a credit. There's no repetition. Each piece of code knowledge appears only once, and most pieces of knowledge are represented only once, and an HD distinction is that every piece of knowledge has a single unambiguous authoritative representation within a system. Okay, that's confusing. So this is a matter of dryness, and what I'm going to look for here is that if there are places where you've got the exact same line of code written more than once, okay, then if that only happens sort of in one place, and then I'd probably give a distinction for that. If I don't see any code repetition at all, you know, and it's clear what each piece of code is for, there's no repetition, then I would probably give an HD for that criteria. Appropriate use of data types and control structures. So this is about, do you know how to use loops, and do you know when to use which data structures and how to use them? So if you're using a hash, are you using that hash correctly? Are you, if you're using arrays, are you using those arrays correctly? Do you know how to use them? And that's really what those things are about. This is again about comments. It's the same criteria. I'm going to mark that one as the same as the other comments one, with the same thing, that if your code's really well written and doesn't require verbose comments, then that's good too. This is about comments specifically related to your choice of data types. So where you choose to use a class versus a hash, where you choose to use a hash versus an array, where you're choosing to use a float versus an integer, where you're choosing to use strings versus an array, those kinds of things, okay? That choice is either clear by the way that your code is written, or it's clear by the comments that you've written, or in your README, you could mention it. So somewhere, this really points to in the code, but I would be okay if you mentioned it in the README too, that it's clear to me that you understand why you chose the data types you did, okay? Planning. So this is about the README, and that you've got, you know, some kind of project plan in there, that you've thought through what you have to do to get this project done, and you've documented that. Okay, so this one is about beyond MVP. So whenever you work on anything, you should be thinking about, if I want to extend this, if I want to enhance it later, I want to keep that in mind, okay? So just like we did yesterday and on Monday when we were working through the cafe app and the banking app and thinking this is a part of our MVP and this is something we're not going to get done in our MVP, would be a nice thing to add later. So in your README, you want to document, and I don't think it's specifically listed here, so you should add it. Maybe under description of the app, you could add it, and I might update this and send it to you just to make sure you include everything. Future enhancements, okay? Future enhancements. What is at least, you know, 2 or 3 things that you could do to this app after the MVP to make it better? Project management tools. So you should have evidence that you use Trello, so there's Trello screenshots. And with Git, don't worry about here what it says about branches. I don't care if you use branches. You can use branches if you want. If you just want to use master, I'm okay with that too for this project. But what I want to see is what I mentioned already. I want to see lots of commits with good messages. That's what I want to see. All right? So you show me pictures of your Trello board, at least 2 pictures, 3 pictures might be better, showing me your Trello board at different states, and a GitHub repo with good commits and good commit messages. So not just like 3 commits, like at least, I don't know, honestly, you should probably have at least 10 commits, you know, working on something for a couple of days. Don't worry about this one too much. This one I'm going to mark the same as the one before it. So you do want to show that your user stories are reflected in your Trello board, okay? You can do some attempt at scoping them, all right? The sizing, small, medium, large. Define what small, medium, and large is like we did. You could use the same criteria I did. Small is less than an hour, mediums 1 to 2 hours, large is 2 to 3 hours. Anything bigger than large should be broken down more. And then for at least a few of your user stories documented in cards, you've done that sizing. Okay, at this point, it's really about practicing that. I don't expect you to be an expert at it, but I want you to have a go, all right? I want you to practice it and demonstrate that you've practiced it. And then I'll have higher expectations when you work on the Rails assessment, okay? Because the bigger the project you work on, if you don't do these things, then it really does impact the quality of what you produce. On a 2-day project, it won't have as much impact, but it's important to practice it, I think, okay? This one is just about Git. Don't worry about merges and pull requests from all team members. This I'm going to mark the same way as I do the other one. As long as you've got lots of good commits with good commit messages, I'll give you an HD for this one. Okay? Okay, so look, if you're sitting next to each other, then you're probably going to collaborate that way. But give me at least one screenshot for the purposes of evidence. Okay? Because this is an accredited course, and because all of the marks that we give on assessments get audited by another body, and at any time they can come back to us, even like 5 years from now, and say, show me evidence that this student met this criteria for this learning outcome, and we have to be able to show them evidence. So give me at least one screenshot. It doesn't have to be a screenshot of Slack. It can be something in your README that says how you communicated, and that's also sufficient. So if I'll add something to the README section, so give you a place to put this. You know, just something like we pair programmed, we sat next to each other, or we used VS Code Live Share to communicate every day. Okay, if you have something documented like that, then that'll be sufficient. If you are communicating over Discord or Slack or something, give me a screenshot or two and stick it in there. Yes, Aiden?
What is VS Code Live Share? Is that like you can put a code in the file?
Yes. Yeah, it's really cool. So we'll look at that this afternoon. I'll show it to you. Testing. Okay? So if you have at least 3 tests in your test spreadsheet that you've run, and at least one of them is a negative test case. So that, I'm honestly not too fussed about it. Really, I'm going to give an HD here. If you've got, and if you don't have at least 3, I'm going to be so disappointed. Like, have more than 3, okay? Test cases documented in your spreadsheet, and run those test cases more than once and document that. If you do that, you'll get an HD for this one, okay? Don't worry about the negative test case thing. Like, that's more relevant when you're doing automated testing and doing an expect not. I don't even know why we have that in there. Yeah. Consideration for edge cases. So I want to see that, you know, sort of the credit here is that I can tell by your if statements or case statements that you're checking, you've got an else case that catches like user input that you don't expect. I want to see that you're dealing with user input that's like in a form you don't expect, like say you're expecting them to type in a number and they type in a word, that sort of thing. I want to be able to see in your code that you're handling that case. To get a distinction, you've also got a test that tests one of those cases that you've got bad user input, or a corner case we call them, something you don't actually expect to come into a method, you know, input to a method that's unexpected, that you have a test case that's addressing that. And you get an HD here if you have multiple tests that test for those unexpected inputs. It doesn't have to be user input. It could be unexpected input to a function. Okay? You know how we were testing that function yesterday? And it took an input? So if you have, you know, test cases that deal with, you pass that function something it doesn't expect. Like our function was expecting one of, it was expecting latte, tea, scone, quit, and anything else we called invalid, right? So if anything else came in, we handled it. We said that's invalid, right? Yes?
Just regarding the edge cases, are you expecting if else statements? I was with the cafe app, I was just saying using a tool I said it would come back to 0, but using a default of 1, so anything that...
That's fine. It doesn't have to be if else. No. Yeah, so I'm just giving that example, Isaac, because it's the most like obvious. Yeah, but no, definitely. As long as I can tell from your code that you're handling edge cases, and then HD if you're testing for it, because then it's like super clear for me to see that you handled it, right? So that's the difference. If you've got a test, if you have a test that's covering that, then it's clear for everyone on the team that we're handling that case. If I've got to look through your code to see that you're doing it, or somebody on your team has to look through the code to feel confident, then that's not as good, right? So, all right, accessibility. Let's talk about these next three, which are going to seem a bit silly for this app, but we have to include them, and this is what you have to do to deal with them. Accessibility for a terminal app may include things like not using dark purple on a black screen. Okay, somebody who has poor vision or even normal vision would have trouble seeing that. Yes, Aiden.
When people have different terminal screens, they could also affect them. So wouldn't that just be the default in those cases?
Yeah, probably. So when you think about accessibility in a terminal app, it's generally going to be around around sightedness. You might be able to think about other things related to accessibility in a terminal app. Like you wouldn't want to necessarily have like a wildly flashing screen because someone with epilepsy might, be triggered by that. So you can think about who are all the potential users of your app, and what do you have to consider in order for everyone, to be able to use your app and without a problem. Okay? Now what I expect is in your README, you mention something about accessibility and what you considered. Okay? It could just be like a sentence or two that says, these are the things that I would have. Now, you might not have, you could say, for example, I could use a text-to-speech gem. There is one for people who are poor-sighted, have trouble seeing. So that's one thing that you can mention. There is a gem that does that. It doesn't mean you have to use the gem. You could say this is something that I could do as a future enhancement to make my app more accessible to people with vision issues, right? So have a think about the accessibility of your app, and mention something about it, how you are dealing with it or could deal with it in a future enhancement. Okay? Okay. Outcomes of use of the app: harm, offense, etc. So this is about potential legal, moral, ethical, and cultural and safety issues related to your app. For example, if your app is a gambling app, then you could talk about the potential moral, ethical issues around gambling. If your app is a game where you kill as many little rabbits as you can, then you can talk about, maybe the ethical and moral issues around violence. If it's like a game where you like kill other people or something, then you can talk about that, and how you might have to have considerations for the age of the person using your app, or neurodiversity or something like that, right? So have a think about the ethical, legal. There could be legal implications depending on what your app's about. You may be like, I'm writing a grocery list app. There really aren't any ethical, moral, or legal implications. And if that's the case, then just say that, okay? Have at least one sentence that shows you have thought about those considerations, and if there's anything to do, that you've either done it or how you could do it in a future enhancement. Yes, Abe?
We didn't point out legal stuff. Would that include if you're using gyms and you're having a license?
Yeah, sure. Yes, that is another thing. So the legal implications of using a particular gem, that you've considered the licensing for that gem. Yep, that's a good one. Thanks, Hayden. Broader societal impacts. So this is related to social, political, cultural, racial, gender, and international issues. So there may not be any for your app, okay? But for example, if you wrote a game that has you like pick who's going to survive if there's an apocalypse or something, and you want to make sure that it's not like race or gender or culturally biased, yeah.
How would you be defining like race and stuff?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, so you might not, but you should. When you're building anything that you're going to release to the public, you should at least consider these things, right? You can get yourself into a lot of trouble or a really embarrassing situation if you don't consider these things. So have a think about it. If there are any broader possible social, political, cultural, racial, gender, and international issues, okay, related to your app. And if there aren't any, say that you couldn't think of any, okay? And if there are, then list what they are and how you're managing it in your app, or if you're not, how you could in a future enhancement, okay? That's true for all three of these criteria. If you don't mention anything about it in your README, I cannot give you any points for those three criteria. You have to mention them, okay? Submission. So here's the one that's worth 10 points. Just put the stuff in the right directories and zip it up with the right name, okay? That's all you have to do. Presentation. If you are here to present and you present, I'll give you all 30 points, okay? You have to talk. You have to be here. You have to talk. You get 30 points. You're not here. You don't talk. You get 0 points. 30 or 0. That's what you get for this one, okay? So I know that there's criteria listed there, but the way that I mark it is what I'm telling you, all right? You hear, you talk, 30 points. Now, if there's some reason that you have, say for example, on that Monday you're like just really sick, or your kid's really sick, or something happens and you just can't be here to present, then we'll work out another time for you to present, okay? But do everything in your power to be here and to present when we present on Monday. If you have to come in later because of something going on in the morning, let me know, and we'll just have you and your partner present later, right? Okay, so we'll work around it. We just want to make sure that everybody presents so you get these marks. Yes?
Do you mean next Monday? Or the Monday after that?
Monday week. So you work on this next week.
Yeah.
Tuesday, Wednesday, the week after that.
Oh, okay, so we get
Yes.
a whole week to basically work on it technically.
Well, you have until Friday at 9 p.m.
Yeah, I was just
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. Okay, now I'm going to give you some advice. Don't wait until 8:45 Friday night to try to submit, because guess what? Everybody else does too, across all 3 campuses, trying to submit to the same Canvas instance at 8:45. And then guess what happens? Yeah, it doesn't work. It has like tremendous lag, it crashes, and then people are sending me Slack messages in a panic. I can't submit my assignment. Canvas just isn't responding. It keeps crashing. And I'm like, okay, well, don't do it at the last minute, people. Yes?
Just regarding that, is there a accommodated where you were to submit ahead of time and not the last minute change?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Good question, Isaac. You can submit any time before the submission deadline, and if you resubmit the same file, it will replace the file that you put there. Okay? So submit earlier is totally fine. My advice, plan to submit before 8 p.m. on Friday. Okay? Build your project plan so that you're submitting before 8 p.m. on Friday. Don't wait until 9 p.m. Just don't, okay? I'm going to have so little sympathy for you if you're like at 8:55, you won't let me submit, and be like, duh, okay. Tell me something interesting, because that's not interesting. So, yeah, an hour's difference isn't that much. Just plan to submit it at least an hour earlier. Well before then is even better, right? Any questions?
I suppose, what happens, like, I'm not aiming for it, but what happens if we score 0? Like, we just completely fall down, fail.
That has never happened.
Okay.
That has never happened. In fact, we have not yet had anyone fail a project assessment. Some people have gotten close, okay, like what they submit is just like passing, but we have not yet had anybody fail a project assessment, okay? Yes.
Would it have to be really bad to fail?
Yeah, it'd have to be really bad.
Can you say
I'd
that?
have to be quotes.
Yeah, so the course, anybody who stays with it throughout the course doesn't fail. There are people who drop out because they just can't keep up, or because life gets in the way, and keeps them from being able to do what they need to do. Then we have 2 tests in this course. Okay, 2 tests. One of them is the Ruby test, which is the same week as the day after the presentations. Is a Ruby test. Okay.
In class or?
In class. Open book, but you can't just randomly use Google and Stack Overflow. Open book meaning you can use the slides, you can use any notes you've taken, you can use any code that you have, you can use VS Code, you can use IRB. What?
Ruby Docs is like open book, isn't it?
You can use Ruby Docs. That's fine. You can use Ruby Docs, but don't Google Stack Overflow. Yeah.
If you write like Spark code that you can you're able to like
Use that for your terminal app.
let's say you've been like referencing something right from another repo in GitHub. Would you be able to if you had downloaded that from
Are you talking about for the test?
Yeah, would you be able to
Yeah.
use that when writing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. So look, the test is timed. The test, you have 90 minutes, and that sounds like a long time, and it ain't. That 90 minutes
How many questions?
goes fast. It's 15 questions, I think. Okay? 15 questions, 90 minutes. Some of them are super easy, and some of them are not so easy. Yes.
When is this?
It is on the day after presentations, the Tuesday, so Tuesday week. Okay? Tuesday week. Today, I'm going to give you a review sheet, okay, that you can kind of do over the next week or so. On Monday afternoon, after we've done presentations, so Monday week, I'll do a review. We'll go through that review sheet, okay? As you do this review sheet, if there are things you're really unsure about, revisit those things and the slides and the videos and whatever other resources you want. And then you can ask me if you still just feel really, if you feel really stuck, and then we'll talk through those things. I'll focus on those things in one class. On Tuesday morning, before we take that Ruby test, I'll do another review. We'll go through that review sheet. If you've done the review sheet and you have questions, I don't know how to do this, we'll go over those things right before the test. You can take notes, okay? You can use all of your notes. The review is designed so that if you can confidently do the stuff in the review, you will absolutely pass the test, okay? You only have to get 50% to pass, all right? We do have people fail the Ruby test every time we give it, the first time through. You will have a chance to retake it, okay? You'll have a chance to retake it. And if you fail it the first time, we'll do a review together. I'll do a review with anybody who's failed it, and anybody will be welcome to come to that as well. But I'll do a review that focuses, I'll have looked at what you put in the test, I'll have an understanding of where your lack of where you're still not sure of things, and we'll review those things. Okay, so I'm committed to you passing that test. Yes?
What happens if you fail the second time?
Then we can have a problem. Okay? So if you fail it the second time, then, it's either because you, just haven't really given yourself to doing what you need to do to learn this material. If you fail it the second time, we're going to have to really talk about what we want to do to move forward, because this part of the course is the fundamentals. In some ways it's really hard because it's an introduction of a lot of new concepts and ways of doing things for most of you in here, okay? And it's absolutely essential that you have a solid understanding of what we cover in this part of the course to be able to do the rest of the course. Because after we do Ruby, we do spend a few weeks on HTML, CSS, which is a little bit of a little side step. It's a totally different thing, right? HTML and CSS is not like other programming. It's markup language and styling. It's a bit different. And it's necessary for web development. In Rails and in JavaScript stack, there's always going to be some HTML and CSS. You have to understand it. You have to know how to use it. I'll tell you, it's my least favorite thing we do in this class, but some people will really like it. Then we go into Rails, and if you don't have a solid understanding of what we've done this part of the class, you are going to suffer when we do Rails. And then we go on to JavaScript in the MERN stack, which is even a bit more overwhelming for some people because Rails includes a lot of scaffolding, so a lot of stuff is like magic. It just does it for you. Some people like that, some people don't. In JavaScript, we pretty much have to write it all ourselves. And if you don't have a really solid understanding of these fundamentals that we're covering now, you are just going to really get lost when we get to those subjects. So if you can't pass the Ruby test is not that difficult to pass. If you give yourself to learning what's in the review sheet and what we've done so far, okay, and you work with me to do the review, you'll pass the Ruby test. If you can't pass the Ruby test, then we really do need to talk about how we move forward. Okay?
Have you had people fail the second time?
I've had people barely pass the second time, and then I have conversations with those people too about if this is the right place for them to be right now. There's always options, because there are different reasons that people get into that place. Sometimes it's because they don't have as much passion or desire for learning this as they thought they do, And when it comes down to doing it, other things, other distractions, I'm not talking about like real life situations that are hard to deal with. I'm talking about the case where there aren't hard things going on in life or with health. Sometimes that happens. Hard things are going on with life and health. And so this isn't the right time to do a boot camp for that person. And then we can defer, We can talk about, okay, let's stop here, and you can come back in the next intake if it's more appropriate then. Your circumstances have changed, and that's happened several times. Sometimes there aren't life circumstances or health in the way, and people are just distracted by Netflix or socializing or playing games or whatever else. Other things are more important to them than doing what they need to do to be successful in this boot camp. It's a boot camp, It's a boot camp. So you have to be committed and have some passion around getting through it, learning the material in this format, in this accelerated kind of format, right? You have to be committed to that. You have to have some real, actual, authentic desire to do it. And some people think they do, and they say they do, but then their actions don't align with that, okay? And look, that happens too, we're all human beings, and we think we know what we want, and most of the time we don't actually know what we want. So, and for those people, I'll have a conversation with them too. So I'm going to endeavor to understand, for people who are struggling in this course, what are the barriers? What is the reason for the struggle? A lot of times it's really genuine reasons, like things beyond your control, your health or your life circumstances. That happens, and so we deal with that the best we can. Sometimes it's been, we still try to push this, they still want to push through. And then we talk about what can we do to support you so that you can actually get through this. And then I'll do everything in my power to support that person getting through, And sometimes we just have to say, if it's just not working right now, I'll come back next year, and we'll try again. So it's definitely a case-by-case basis, and we have seen all of those things happen. Yeah. And all of it's okay. However it is how it is. That's, the way life is. It is how it is. And we have to deal with reality and how things are. And it always, I believe, is the way it's meant to be and supposed to be. So we'll make it work. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to update this little section about the submission and what's in the README. I'm going to make sure it includes very specifically some of these things that aren't specifically listed but are kind of there in the rubric criteria, okay, so that it doesn't catch you by surprise. Because what I see happen is you get really busy, people tend to leave the documentation to the end. Don't do that. I don't recommend you do that. Work on the documentation ahead of time or as you go. Don't leave it until Friday at 5 o'clock. I'm going to do all the documentation now. Don't do that, okay, because then you'll miss stuff. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to update this little section here and make sure it includes everything. I'm going to suggest that you take that, copy it, paste it into a readme.md, and use that as your skeleton for the README, okay? And make sure that in your Trello board you have cards for filling in each of those sections, right? And assign them to one or the other of you. Decide who's going to work on which bits. And then I'm going to give you a copy of the rubric criteria, probably as a PDF. until it's released, so you can have a look at it, because it's not going to be released until Tuesday, I think, in Canvas. Okay? And then if you're reading through it later and you're like, oh, I'm not really sure what this means, then you can come back and ask me. Okay? All good? Sweet. All right.